They laughed when she opened that cardboard box at the county fair. Naked, pink, white, 3 dozen chicks that looked more like plucked quail than anything that belonged on a working farm. The auctioneer couldn't even get a starting bid. Farmers turned their backs. The 4-H kids pointed and giggled. Even the old man running the feed store shook his head and told her she might as well have bought 3 dozen rocks. But Sarah Mitchell didn't laugh. She handed over $87, tucked that box under her arm, and walked out into the Oklahoma dust with a secret nobody else could see. 7 months later, those same farmers who mocked her were knocking on her gate at dawn. And that feed store old man. He was begging her to tell him how a woman with 3 dozen unwanted, featherless, pink-white chicks was making $40,000 a month before the first snow fell. Sarah Mitchell was 34 when the bank took her grandmother's farmhouse. It wasn't just a house. It was 80 years of Sunday dinners, of peach cobbler on the windowsill, of her grandfather's calloused hands teaching her to hold a newborn lamb. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday in a manila envelope that felt heavier than a Bible. Her husband had left 6 months earlier, taking the truck and most of their savings, saying he couldn't watch her waste her life on dirt and debt anymore. Her mother sat on the porch swing and didn't say a word, just rocking back and forth, staring at the soybeans that had failed for the 3rd straight year. The drought had turned the land the color of burnt toast. The well was running dry. And Sarah, who had grown up believing that soil was something you could trust more than people, was starting to wonder if her ex-husband had been right. She had just $412, a mortgage she couldn't pay, and a mother whose quiet disappointment hurt more than screaming. The county extension agent had stopped returning her calls. The co-op wouldn't extend her credit another season. She was one missed payment away from watching her family's legacy become someone else's hunting lease. That was the Tuesday. By Saturday, she was at the county fair, not because she wanted to be, but because her neighbour, old Mrs. Peabody, had insisted she get out of the house before she dried up like the creek bed. Sarah knew the fair. She knew the smell of fried dough and livestock dust. But she had never gone there. Broke, desperate, and certainly not planning to buy anything. She was walking past the poultry tent, thinking about how she would tell her mother that the house was gone, when she heard the auctioneer's voice crack like a whip. 3 dozen naked neck chicks, pink-white. Nobody wants these ugly birds. Do I hear $5? $5 for the lot? Sarah stopped. She looked through the crowd. There, in a card box that had once held Coca-Cola bottles, were the strangest creatures she had ever seen. They were chicks, yes, but they looked wrong. Their necks were bare, pink skin shining through sparse white down. Their bodies were patchy, half-feathered, half-exposed, giving them the appearance of something half-finished, like God had gotten distracted halfway through making them. A farmer in overalls spat tobacco juice and said, "Those are Turkins, naked necks, ugliest birds in poultry. Meat's tough, eggs are small, and they look like they got the mange." Another man laughed and said, "My granddaddy called them buzzard birds. Said they were only good for snake food." The auctioneer dropped his voice. "Do I hear $2? $2 for 3 dozen? Nobody raised a hand. Sarah looked at those chicks huddled together in that box, shivering in the September heat. She saw something else in them. She saw herself, unwanted, mocked, written off before they even had a chance. She thought of her grandmother's voice, years ago, telling her that the things nobody wants are often the things worth the most. She raised her hand. $87, she said, which was every bill she had left. The auctioneer stared. The crowd went silent. Then someone laughed. Then everyone laughed. The feed store owner, a man named Earl who had known her since she was in pigtails, walked over and put his hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, honey," he said. "Not unkindly. You just bought yourself 3 dozen problems. Take my advice. Put them in the smoker and call it a loss." She didn't answer. She just picked up the box, felt the warmth of those strange little bodies against her chest, and walked out into the parking lot while the laughter followed her like a shadow. The first week, she lost 9 of them. She had set up a brooder in her grandmother's old canning shed. She didn't know that naked neck chicks needed different care than standard broilers. Their exposed skin burned under a regular heat lamp. Their lack of feathers meant they couldn't regulate their body temperature the way normal chicks could. She found 3 dead. On Wednesday morning, their pink bodies cold and stiff. 2 more died on Thursday. By Sunday, 9 were gone, and Sarah sat on the dirt floor of that shed with tears running down her face, holding a dead chick and wondering if Earl had been right. She had spent her last $87 on birds that were dying faster than she could bury them. Her mother came out to the shed that evening. She didn't say anything about the dead chicks. She just handed Sarah a cup of coffee and said, "Your grandfather lost 40 head of cattle to blackleg in 1962. He sat in that same spot and cried the same tears. Then he got up and figured out what he did wrong." Sarah didn't sleep that night. She read every book she could find in the county library about naked neck chickens. She learned they were a heritage breed, originally from Transylvania, bred specifically to thrive in hot climates because their lack of neck feathers helped them stay cool. She learned they were actually excellent layers, producing large brown eggs, and that their meat, when raised properly, was tender and lean because they had fewer feathers to pluck, meaning less pin feather contamination. She learned that in Europe they were considered a delicacy, but in Oklahoma they were considered trash. She adjusted the heat lamp, raised the brooder temperature more carefully, added extra bedding for insulation, and started feeding them a higher protein starter mix. The remaining 27 chicks survived. But then came failure number 2. At 6 weeks, when she moved them to the old chicken run behind the barn, the neighbours came to watch. The Hendersons, who farmed the section to the east, brought their teenage sons. The boys leaned on the fence and made buzzard noises. Mr. Henderson told Sarah, loud enough for everyone to hear, that he had seen roadkill with more commercial value than her flock. "You can't take those things to the poultry auction in Tulsa," he said. "They'll laugh you off the property. And no restaurant in the state is putting a naked chicken on their menu." Sarah tried to sell eggs at the farmer's market the following Saturday. She set up a table next to the honey vendor and the woman who sold goat soap. She had 2 dozen brown eggs from her naked necks, carefully washed and placed in recycled cartons. People walked past her table like she was invisible. When someone did stop, they looked at the eggs, then at her, then back at the eggs. "What kind of chickens lay these?" a woman asked. "Naked necks," Sarah said. "Heritage breed, very rare here." The woman made a face. "I don't want eggs from a sick chicken. You should get those birds checked." She walked away. Sarah sold 4 cartons that day, 4, for $8 total. She spent $6 on gas. Her net profit was $2, and she had spent 14 hours preparing, driving, and sitting in the sun while people whispered about her diseased birds. Failure number 3 came at week 10. She had researched enough to know that naked neck meat was prized in certain European markets, and she thought she might be able to sell processed birds to specialty butchers in Oklahoma City. She called 3 butchers. The first one hung up when she described the birds. The second one told her he only sourced from certified operations, which Sarah couldn't afford to become. The third one, a woman named Gina who ran a small organic meat shop, agreed to look at one bird. Sarah drove an hour into the city with a processed naked neck in a cooler. Gina opened the cooler, looked at the bird, and frowned. "The carcass looks good," she said. "Clean, almost no pin feathers. But I can't sell this. My customers want organic, yes, but they also want beautiful. They want the story to match the packaging. And nobody in Oklahoma wants to eat something that looks like it lost a fight with a lawnmower." She suggested Sarah try ethnic markets, but warned her that without USDA inspection, she couldn't cross state lines. Sarah drove home with the bird still in the cooler, her gas tank nearly empty, and her mother's silence heavier than ever in the passenger seat. That night, she sat on the porch and watched the naked necks pecking in the yard. They were fully grown now, ugly and magnificent at the same time, their pink necks stretched tall, their white bodies moving like ghosts in the moonlight. The Henderson boys had started throwing rocks at them from the road. Earl had stopped asking about them, which was worse than teasing. And Sarah had exactly $11 left in her account, a foreclosure notice that was now 30 days past due, and a flock of birds that nobody wanted, nobody would buy, and nobody believed in. She was out of ideas. She was out of money. And for the first time since the bank took the farmhouse, she was out of hope. She sat there until midnight, listening to the naked necks make their strange, guttural clucks, and she thought about giving up. She thought about calling the processor and having the whole flock turned into dog food. She thought about packing her mother's bags and moving to the city, where at least failure didn't have an audience. But then she remembered something her grandmother used to say, "When the hogs got out, or the well went dry, or the hail took the wheat. The land doesn't care about your feelings, Sarah. It cares about what you plant. Plant something worth growing, and the land will meet you halfway." Sarah didn't know what to plant, but she knew she wasn't ready to leave yet. The turning point came on a Thursday in late October, from the last place Sarah expected. She had taken a part-time job cleaning rooms at the Sleepy Hollow Motel on Highway 81, just to keep the lights on and buy feed for the birds. It was humbling work, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets while her naked necks roamed the farm, free-ranging on what little grass the drought had left. She was vacuuming the lobby when a man checked in, a tall guy with a leather briefcase and boots that had actually seen dirt. He asked if there was a good place to eat nearby, and Sarah, because she was tired and lonely and needed someone to talk to, told him about the diner in town. Then he noticed the photograph she kept in her apron pocket, the one of her naked necks that she looked at when the work got too hard. "What are those?" he asked. Sarah tensed, ready for another round of mockery. "Naked neck chickens," she said. "Heritage breed. Nobody around here wants them." The man didn't laugh. He leaned closer. "Naked necks? Turken? My wife's grandmother raised these in Hungary. She called them the Queen of the Coop. Best meat in Europe. And the eggs?" He kissed his fingers. "Unbelievable. You can't find them fresh in the States. Not real ones." His name was David Kowalski, and he was a food distributor based in Chicago who specialized in importing rare European ingredients for high-end restaurants. He had been driving through Oklahoma on his way to a meeting in Dallas when his car started making a noise, that sounded expensive. He was stranded for 2 days while the mechanic fixed his car. And in those 2 days, Sarah told him everything. She told him about the auction, the deaths, the farmer's market, the butcher who said her birds were ugly. David listened, nodding slowly. And then he asked a question that changed everything. Have you ever heard of direct-to-chef marketing? Sarah hadn't. David explained that the most profitable niche in American agriculture wasn't selling to supermarkets or farmers' markets. It was selling directly to chefs who wanted something their competitors couldn't get. A naked neck chicken, raised free range on an Oklahoma farm, processed on site, delivered fresh to a chef in Chicago or New York. That's not poultry, Sarah. That's a story. That's marketing gold. Chefs don't care if the bird is pretty. They care if the plate is pretty. And they care if their customers can't get it anywhere else. He showed her Instagram accounts of chefs posting photos of heritage breed poultry, charging $40 for an entree, and sourcing rare ingredients from small farms. Your birds are ugly, David said. But in the right kitchen, ugly is authentic. Ugly is artisanal. Ugly is exactly what people pay premium for. Then he gave her the secret. Not just the concept, but the method. He taught her how to build a chef network using social media, how to take photographs of her birds that highlighted their uniqueness rather than hiding it, how to write descriptions that turned their naked necks from a flaw into a feature. Call them Transylvanian naked necks, he said. Not Turkins, not buzzard birds. Transylvanian naked necks, heritage breed, rare, heat-tolerant, clean plucking, limited availability. He helped her set up an Instagram account that afternoon in the motel lobby. He showed her how to use hashtags that chefs followed. He wrote her first post, a photograph of a naked neck standing in the Oklahoma dust, its pink neck stretched toward the sky, with the caption that said the only thing more rare than this bird is the farmer stubborn enough to raise it. Sarah didn't understand social media. She didn't understand hashtags or algorithms or why anyone would care what happened on a failing farm in Oklahoma. But she understood one thing David said that stuck in her chest like a seed. You don't need the whole world to want your birds, Sarah. You need 12 chefs. 12 chefs who want something nobody else has. 12 chefs who will pay you what these birds are actually worth. 12 chefs. Not the whole county, not the whole state. Just 12 people who understood what she had. David left 2 days later, after his car was fixed. He didn't buy any birds. He didn't invest any money. He just gave her knowledge, and a phone number, and a belief that she hadn't felt in months. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat at her grandmother's kitchen table with a laptop that barely connected to the internet, and she started building a list. She found chefs in Chicago, in Austin, in Denver, in Nashville. She sent messages, not sales pitches, stories. She told them about the auction, about the $87, about the pink necks and the white feathexes and the Oklahoma dust. She sent photographs her mother took with an old digital camera, photos that were grainy and imperfect and real. And she waited. For 3 days, nothing. Then, on Monday morning, her phone buzzed. It was a chef in Austin named Marcus. He had 300 followers and a restaurant that had just been written up in a food magazine. His message was 4 words long. How much per bird? Sarah stared at those words for 10 minutes. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know what to charge. She had been selling eggs for $2 a carton. She had never sold a whole bird to anyone except the idea of a processor. She called David. He answered on the first ring. Charge what they're worth, he said. Not what the market says. What they're worth. These birds take longer to raise than Cornish cross. They need more space. They eat better feed. And there are almost none of them in the entire United States. Start at $18 a pound. Whole bird. Minimum order 5 birds. Delivery extra. $18 a pound. Sarah almost dropped the phone. The going rate for organic chicken at the grocery store was $5 a pound. $18 was insane. It was arrogant. It was exactly what she needed to be. She typed back to Marcus. $18 per pound. Whole bird only. 5 bird minimum. Delivered fresh, never frozen. From my farm to your kitchen. She held her breath. Marcus replied in 30 seconds. I'll take 10. When can you deliver? Sarah looked out the window at her flock. She had 27 birds. She couldn't sell 10, not yet. But she also couldn't say no. She typed back. I can deliver 8 in 3 weeks. Processing on site. USDA exemption for small farm direct sale. She didn't know if that was true. She would have to look it up. But she sent it anyway. Marcus replied with one word. Done. And just like that, Sarah Mitchell had her first customer. Her first real customer. Not a pity purchase. Not a neighbor trying to be nice. A chef who wanted what she had and was willing to pay 18 times what she had ever dreamed of charging. But one chef wasn't enough. David had said 12. So Sarah kept sending messages. She sent 40 that week. She got 3 responses. One was a no, one was a maybe, and one was a chef in Chicago named Elena, who ran a farm-to-table restaurant in Wicker Park. Elena's message was longer. I grew up with these birds in Romania. My grandmother raised them. If you have real Transylvanian naked necks pasture-raised, I'll take everything you can send me. Start with 15 birds, and if they're as good as I remember, I'll put you on my menu. Permanently. Everything you can send me. Sarah read those words until she memorized them. She had 27 birds. She had promised 8 to Marcus, 15 to Elena. That left 4, and she needed breeding stock. She couldn't sell them all. But she also couldn't say no to Elena. So she made a decision that would either save her farm or end it completely. She would sell Marcus 8 birds. She would sell Elena 12 birds, keeping 3 of her best hens and 1 rooster for breeding. And she would use the money to buy an incubator, build a better brooder, and raise enough chicks to fulfill the demand she was starting to see. It was a gamble. A terrifying all-or-nothing gamble. But Sarah had already lost everything once. She wasn't afraid of losing again. She was afraid of never trying. The next 7 months were the hardest and most beautiful months of Sarah's life. She started with that incubator, a second-hand styrofoam model she bought from a woman on Facebook Marketplace for $40. It held 42 eggs. She placed her 3 best naked neck hens with her 1 rooster, collected their eggs every morning, and loaded the incubator with a carefulness that felt like prayer. 21 days later, 29 chicks hatched. 29. She had started with 3 dozen and lost 9. Now, in 1 hatch, she had almost replaced her entire flock. She built a new brooder in the barn, larger, better insulated, with heat lamps on dimmers, so she could control the temperature exactly. She studied everything. She learned that naked necks, because of their lack of feathers, needed shade in summer but sun in winter. She learned that their meat developed better flavor if they were allowed to free range on grass and bugs for at least 12 weeks. She learned that their eggs, when the hens were fed a diet rich in omega-3s and greens, had yolks so dark orange they looked like sunsets. And she learned that the drought, which had killed her soybeans and dried her well, was actually an advantage. Naked necks were heat tolerant. They thrived in hot, dry climates. While other farmers were losing their standard broilers to heat stress, Sarah's birds were scratching in the dust. healthy and strong, their naked necks keeping them cool while feathered birds panted and suffered. She documented everything. She took photographs every week. She weighed the birds. She recorded feed consumption. She kept notes on which hens laid the most eggs, which roosters produced the biggest offspring, which chicks grew the fastest. She was no longer just a woman with a box of ugly chickens. She was a breeder. She was a farmer with a plan. By January, she had completed her first deliveries. Marcus in Austin received his 8 birds and posted a photograph on Instagram of a plated naked neck breast with wild mushrooms and rosemary. The caption read that it was a Transylvanian naked neck from Oklahoma, the most flavorful chicken he had ever cooked, with limited availability and menu changes weekly. His post got 400 likes. Sarah's phone started ringing the next day. 3 more chefs, then 5. By February, she had a waiting list. She bought a second incubator, then a third. She converted the old hog barn into a brooder house that could hold 200 chicks at a time. She hired Mrs. Peabody's grandson, Jake, to build chicken tractors, portable pens that let the birds move to fresh grass. She paid him in birds and cash, and he worked harder than anyone she had ever hired. The drought continued. The neighbours continued to struggle. The Hendersons lost half their cattle to heat and sold the rest at a loss. Earl's feed store started closing early because there weren't enough customers. But Sarah's operation grew. By March, she was processing 30 birds a week. By April, 50. She bought a used walk-in cooler from a closed restaurant, installed it in the old milking parlour, and suddenly she could process birds in batches, keeping them fresh for delivery. She developed a delivery route. Austin every other Tuesday. Chicago once a month. Shipping overnight in insulated boxes, she packed herself. Nashville every 3 weeks. A chef in Denver found her on Instagram and ordered 20 birds for a special event. A food writer from a national magazine emailed her, wanting to visit the farm. Sarah said yes, even though she was terrified. The writer came in May. She walked the pasture with Sarah, took photographs of the naked necks, moving through the grass like strange white ghosts, and asked about the auction. The $87. The mockery. Sarah told her everything. She didn't hide the failures. She didn't pretend she had always known what she was doing. She just told the truth. The article came out in June. It was 3 pages in a major food magazine, with a full-page photograph of Sarah holding a naked neck against her chest. The Oklahoma sunset behind her, the head reading that the ugly bird had say a farm. The day the magazine hit stands, Sarah's website crashed from traffic. Her Instagram gained 3,000 followers in 48 hours, and her email inbox filled with orders from chefs she had never heard of, in cities she had never visited, all wanting the bird that nobody in Oklahoma would touch. By July, exactly 7 months after she had walked out of that county fair with a cardboard box and a dream, Sarah Mitchell was processing 200 birds a week. She was selling whole birds at $18 a pound, half birds at $20 a pound, and eggs at $12 a dozen to a specialty grocery in Dallas. She had 3 employees. She had paid off the foreclosure. She had bought her grandmother's farmhouse back from the bank, and she was making on average $40,000 a month. $40,000. From birds that had cost her $87. From birds that farmers had laughed at. From birds that a butcher had called ugly. The drought was still going. The well was still low. But Sarah had found something that grew in the dry soil. Something that thrived in the heat. Something that turned failure into flavor and mockery into money. She stood in her pasture one evening in July, watching the sun set over her flock, and she thought about that Tuesday in September when the bank took the house. She thought about her ex-husband saying she was wasting her life on dirt and debt. She thought about the Henderson boys throwing rocks and Earl shaking his head, and the woman at the farmer's market who said her chickens were sick. And she smiled, because she had learned the most important lesson a farmer can learn. The land doesn't care what looks pretty. The land cares what works. And sometimes, the ugliest seed grows the most beautiful harvest. The numbers, when Sarah finally sat down to count them, didn't seem real. In month 1, she had made -$11, if you counted the dead chicks and the gas to the farmer's market. In month 2, she made $240 from Marcus and Elena, minus processing costs, minus feed, minus the incubator. In month 3, she cleared $800 for the first time. By month 4, it was $4,000. Month 5, $12,000. Month 6, $28,000. And month 7, the month that changed everything, she deposited $43,612,612 into her grandmother's old account at the First National Bank of Oklahoma. The teller who handled the deposit was the same one who had processed her foreclosure paperwork. She looked at the deposit slip, looked at Sarah, and said, "Ma'am, would you like to speak with someone about a savings plan? Or perhaps a loan for expansion?" Sarah laughed for the first time in that bank. "No, thank you," she said. "Just keep it safe. I've got birds to feed." The authorities came next, not the government kind, though the USDA inspector did visit and gave her operation a clean bill of health, praising her on-site processing setup. The authorities were the people who had once dismissed her. Earl from the feed store showed up at her gate on a Tuesday morning, holding a clipboard and wearing a hat he only wore to church. "Sarah," he said, not quite meeting her eyes, "I was wondering if you might have a minute. I got 3 customers this week asking for naked neck feed, special blend, high protein, and I was thinking, maybe, if you're buying in bulk now, we could work out a deal. Maybe I could be your exclusive supplier." Sarah looked at the man who had told her to put her birds in the smoker, at the clipboard with her name in shaky writing, and she said, "Earl, I'd love to work with you, but exclusive means you carry my brand, my blend, my name on the bag, and you pay me a licensing fee for every bag sold." Earl's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Licensing fee? You heard me," Sarah said. And she smiled the same smile she had smiled at the auction when everyone laughed. "I don't give things away anymore, Earl. Not even to old friends." He agreed. Of course he agreed. Because by then, Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a farmer with chickens. She was a brand. She was the naked neck queen of Oklahoma, and her feed was selling in 3 states. Then came the Hendersons. Mr. Henderson drove his truck up the road one Saturday, his teenage sons in the back, both of them looking at their boots like they had never thrown a rock in their lives. "Sarah," Mr. Henderson said, leaning on his truck while his cattle dog panted in the heat, "I heard you're hiring. My boys need work, and I heard you pay in cash and birds. We could use both." Sarah looked at the boys who had mocked her flock. She looked at the man who had said her birds had less value than roadkill. And she said, "I am hiring, but my workers don't throw rocks at livestock. They build fences, move chicken tractors, and treat every bird on this farm like it's worth more than they are. Can your boys do that?" Mr. Henderson nodded so hard his hat almost fell off. "They'll learn," he said. "They'll learn from the best." Sarah hired them, not because she was soft, but because she was smart. She needed the help, and she wanted the Henderson boys to understand what it meant to raise something instead of destroy it. She started them at dawn, moving tractors, collecting eggs, processing birds. Within a month, they were talking about starting their own naked neck flock, using Sarah's breeding stock, selling under her brand. She made them partners instead of employees, giving them a percentage of every bird they raised to her standards. It was the kind of move that turned enemies into allies and competitors into a network. The county extension agent, the same one who had stopped returning her calls, sent an official request to visit the farm and write a case study. The state agricultural department invited her to speak at a conference on niche farming. A university professor drove down from Stillwater to study her operation, calling it a masterclass in heritage breed monetization in marginal agricultural zones. And the old auctioneer, the one who couldn't get a $5 bid for her original flock, called her personally to ask if she would consign breeding pairs at the Winter Livestock Show. "I think we could get some real interest this year," he said, his voice careful, respectful. Real interest, Sarah. Maybe even a bidding war. Sarah didn't sell any breeding pairs at auction. She didn't need to. She was selling them privately for $500 a pair, with a 6-month waiting list. But she thanked the auctioneer. She thanked him because he had taught her something valuable. Even if he didn't know it, he had taught her that value is never determined by the crowd. Value is determined by the person who sees what nobody else can see. By month 7, her monthly revenue had stabilized at $40,000, with peaks during holiday seasons when chefs ordered extra birds for special menus. Her profit margin was 60%, unheard of in conventional poultry. She had paid off every debt. She had rebuilt the farmhouse, fixed the well, installed solar panels on the barn roof. Her mother had stopped rocking on the porch swing and started helping with the egg collection. Her hands steady, her eyes bright. And Sarah, who had once sat in the dirt holding a dead chick and wondering if she should give up, was now fielding calls from investors who wanted to franchise her model, from documentary filmmakers who wanted to tell her story, from agricultural schools who wanted her to teach. She said no to most of it. Not because she was ungrateful, but because she had learned the final lesson. Success isn't about scaling until you break. It's about building something strong enough to weather the next drought. And Sarah knew droughts. She knew them in the soil, and she knew them in the soul. She kept her operation at a size she could manage. She kept her standards higher than anyone else's. And she kept her naked necks, those ugly, beautiful pink-white birds, at the center of everything she did, because they had saved her, not just her farm, not just her finances. They had saved her belief that the things nobody wants are often the things that matter most. Before we get to the end of this story, I want to ask you something real quick. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or your country in the comments. I read every single one, and I'm always amazed at how far these stories travel. Are you watching from a farm in Texas? An apartment in Tokyo? A truck stop in Nebraska? Let me know. I want to see how many places we can get on this map. Now back to Sarah, because her story isn't over. It's actually just beginning. Sarah Mitchell didn't just save her farm. She started a movement. Within 2 years of that first $87 purchase, there were 17 naked neck operations in Oklahoma alone, all using her breeding stock, her methods, her brand. She created a cooperative, a network of small farmers who raised heritage birds to her standards and sold through her distribution channels. She didn't compete with them. She lifted them, because she remembered what it felt like to be alone, to be mocked, to have nobody believe in what you were trying to build. The moral of Sarah's story isn't about chickens, it's not even about money, though the money is nice. The moral is about vision, about looking at something the world calls ugly, useless, unwanted, and seeing potential. About buying the bird nobody wants, raising it with everything you have, and proving that value isn't about appearance. It's about effort. It's about belief. It's about the willingness to look foolish today so you can look like a genius tomorrow. Sarah's grandmother was right. The things nobody wants are often the things that are worth the most. But there's a catch. You have to be willing to see it. You have to be willing to bet your last $87 on a cardboard box of pink-white chicks while everyone laughs. You have to be willing to lose 9 birds in a week and not quit. You have to be willing to send 40 messages to chefs and get 39 rejections, because the 40th one changes everything. If you have a dream that looks stupid, let Sarah's story be a permission to keep going. The mockery of today becomes the testimony of tomorrow. The failure of this season becomes the foundation of the next. And the bird that nobody wanted? It becomes the feast that everyone is begging to attend. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that your ugly idea might be your greatest asset, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Because we tell stories like this every week. Stories of farmers who bet on the impossible. Stories of people who turned mockery into millions. Stories that prove the land always meets you halfway if you plant something worth growing. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who is holding a dead chick in their hands, sitting in the dirt, wondering if they should quit. Tell them Sarah's story. Tell them about the naked necks. Tell them that 7 months from now, if they don't give up, they might be the ones answering the door at dawn, while the people who laughed are begging to know their secret. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell and her naked neck chickens. $87 to $40,000 a month. From unwanted to unstoppable. From laughed at to looked up to. And it all started with one woman, one box, and the courage to see what nobody else could see. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.